Okay.
Uh, I've been asked to comment on U.S.-China relations in the aftermath of the summit between Xi Jinping and Barack Obama. Before going into the summit, there were two major issues of contention that were harming the U.S.-China relations. One was the issue of cyber espionage, particularly the theft of intellectual property, and the other was the issue of the South China Sea and the questions of freedom of navigation and access to the sea. I think you could argue that at the summit there was a surprising degree of progress made on the first issue, but not much progress made on the second issue. At the same time, there was another issue which was not a contentious issue, but an important issue, and that was the issue of climate and climate change. And there, the fact that the U.S. and China have brought their positions closer together after the Obama visit to Beijing a year ago, I think is a helpful sign in terms of having a presentation in the Paris climate conference in December this year. The U.S. and Chinese positions won't be so far apart. This is progress when you look back to 2009 in Copenhagen, where U.S. and China were quite some distance apart. It's not enough on the part of either country, but it is progress from where things were a few years ago. On the issue of cyber, what's interesting is that there has been significant progress, and it does come as the result of the summit. When Xi Jinping and Obama met at the summit in Sunnylands in California in 2013, they raised the issue of cyber, and they agreed to set up a joint commission at the bureaucratic level to study it. But then two things happened. One is the revelations by Edward Snowden about American intrusions into Chinese systems, among others. And the other was the American indictment of 5 PLA officers for their role in stealing intellectual property. And these indictments led the Chinese government then to curtail or to suspend their participation in the Joint Commission. On the other hand, it may be that the indictments had some effect, because it was not likely these officers would ever stand trial in an American court, but it did have effect of signaling to the Chinese that we took this issue seriously, and in addition to basically have a naming and shaming effect. In addition to that, the United States had talked about adding additional sanctions, and there had been leaking in Washington saying that there might be more sanctions over the issue of espionage for commercial competitive purposes. What was interesting is that at the summit, Xi Jinping agreed with Obama that both countries would forego intruding in each other's networks to steal intellectual property and share it with companies for commercial advantage. They also agreed to set up a joint commission or engage in joint procedures for investigation of crises in the cyber area if they occurred. That remains to be seen how it will be implemented, but it is a considerable change from the positions that the two countries had a year or more ago. So in that sense, China moved its declaratory policy quite considerably. The big question is, will it also change its behavior? The other thing they agreed to in cyber was to look at developing rules of the road for confidence building and setting norms for cyber warfare. And there they agreed to pick up a proposal by the UN group of government experts, 20 countries, experts that have been meeting in the UN, and submitted a report last July. And one of the things that report proposed was to have an agreement on not attacking certain types of civilian facilities during peacetime. In addition to that, they created their own expert group to look at how you could develop that and implement the idea. And they set up a hotline for discussion in the case of cyber crises. So on the issue of cyber, you could argue that the things were quite different after the summit than they were before the summit. Contrast that with the South China Sea issue, and you'll see that much less progress was made there. The United States has insisted that while we do not take a position on the sovereignty of the various land features in the South China Sea, we do insist that there be freedom of navigation under the law of the sea treaty for the South China Sea, and therefore we cannot accept the so-called 9-line, where China treats the whole of the South China Sea as though it were a Chinese lake. The other point that's worth noticing there is that even when China doesn't claim everything within the South China Sea's 9-line, they have been expanding a number of rocky features and shoals by sand reclamation, and claiming there are about 5 of these that they claim that are going to be for peaceful purposes only. But the interesting question is whether they will think that these features that they've expanded have a right to a territorial sea. Under the law of the sea treaty, they don't. The law of the sea treaty basically does not allow you to pour sand on a rock and call it an island which has a territorial sea. So the United States has been complaining about this. I don't think, from what was publicly reported, that there was much progress between Obama and Xi Jinping on this. And now, more recently, Secretary of Defense Carter has reiterated the view that the United States feels free to navigate any place that's permitted under international law, and that includes within 12 miles of these various features that the Chinese have enhanced with sand reclamation. I hope that this will be a procedure that is accepted by both sides. For example, Americans are now talking about either sailing or flying within the 12 miles of these features in what's called innocent passage. The Chinese, when they had ships off the coast of Alaska, went within 12 miles of one of the Aleutian Islands, and that was quite acceptable under international law as innocent passage. So we'll see whether if the United States does sail close to these features, it becomes something which is regarded as reassertion of rights under freedom of navigation, and does not lead to larger disputes between the countries. I think in that sense, in both these issues, cyber and freedom of navigation of the South China Sea, we'll have to see in the months ahead whether behavior follows the declaratory policy. In the case of cyber, whether there really is a change in the Chinese theft of intellectual property for commercial purposes, and on the South China Sea, whether the agreement that we live under the law of the sea treaty will be accepted. The Chinese have not formally accepted the jurisdiction of the tribunal in the case that's brought by the Philippines. We'll have to see what comes out on that. But I think the U.S. is correct to anchor its position in the law of the sea treaty. So that's, I think, where Chinese and American relations stand after the summit. Some progress, some area of ambiguity, and we'll have to wait on events to see how those play out. Thank you very much.